Let's talk about scanning with negative supply. We're going to be taking a look at what they call the basic kit for 35mm film scanning. We're going to do an overview of it, take a look at what it is, what it does, how it does it, and we're going to answer your questions, the overwhelming majority of which were, is it worth it? Little disclaimer, it's been storming the entire time that I've been shooting this video, so you're going to hear some wind and rain outside. Maybe cozy up next to a fire, maybe make yourself a hot chocolate with some marshmallows, yeah, let's get into it. I want to make it clear that Negative Supply did send me this kit for free. However, they have zero input in what I say in this video. They don't even know I'm making this video. In fact, they didn't even know that I had restarted my long dormant YouTube channel when they offered to send me this kit. So it makes me wonder if they sent this to the wrong person by accident. Anyway, we have the kit, so we're going to take a look at it. First thing we're going to take a look at is the basic riser Mark I. As you can see, this one already has a digital camera attached to it. No, the digital camera does not come with it. You have to supply your own digital camera and lens. So as of right now, these are $189 US, brand new. Sometimes they have scratch and dent models available for $149, and I recommend that if they are available because the cosmetic blemishes on the wood really aren't going to matter to you. It's going to have the same function, and it's going to cost you a little less money. So brand new, $189, scratch and dent model, $149. I recommend the scratch and dent model because it's less expensive if it's available to you. The alternative to Negative Supply's riser are either a tripod or a cheap copy stand. The problem with tripods is that even though you might have one available and they can be inexpensive, is that it's hard to get the camera right over the negative. So there can be some difficulty there because a tripod is not really built for overhead work. Copy stands, on the other hand, are. And that's not to say that you can't get a tripod to work. I know many people that have gotten their tripods to work just fine. However, I really prefer something that is built for top-down, straight-down work like a copy stand. I've been using this cheap copy stand that I got on Amazon for about $80. I think the prices have risen on these to about $90, maybe $95 as of this video. And I'll be honest with you, I was never, ever really happy with this copy stand. It did the job, it worked, it's relatively inexpensive at $90, $95. But my issues with it is when the digital camera was mounted, you adjust the height of the digital camera with this simple mechanism here. It's got this tripod screw, and then you've got this rail here on which the camera goes up and down. And it's really, really difficult to make fine adjustments. And I'm not going to show you the example here, but when a digital camera is mounted to this, when you, let's say you want to bump your digital camera upward by half a centimeter, right? And what happens is it kind of bumps in a really unstable way. So you might go up too far because it bumps up too far, or you know, if you want to move it down, you might bump it down a little too far. So it was always some trial and error. It was always a pain to make the fine adjustments up and down. With Negative Supply's riser, this assembly and this rail, I don't know how they did it, but it's dampened. So when you move it up and down, the movements up and down are smooth. They don't kind of bump up and down like the copy stand does. So a copy stand versus this is worth it every time. Even at a brand new price of $189, it's about $100 more than the cheapest copy stand there is on Amazon. This is worth it. This is, in my opinion, this is definitely worth it. I mean, unless you are on a really tight budget and you can't spend that extra $100 or so, I really, really recommend this, this over the copy stand. However, that copy stand, if you can get it to work, or a tripod, if you can get it to work, you got to do whatever works for you. However, this thing is highly, highly recommended. Next up is the 99 CRI 4x5 Light Source Basic. These actually come in a couple of different sizes, 4x5 and 5x7, and different light levels, 95 CRI and 99 CRI. Negative Supply sent me the 99 CRI. I'll be honest with you, I assume that the 99 CRI is brighter than the 95 CRI. Negative Supply says that the 95 CRI light source is great for scanning black and white film, and you tend to get more favorable results with color film using the 99 CRI light source, and of course the 99 is also great for black and white film. Now, I haven't been able to test that. I only have this one light source here. However, what I have been using for at least a couple of years now is this cheap light table that I got from Amazon for about $40. I think it was even less than $40. At the time I bought it, it was about $37 or so. However, I know that they do fluctuate in price, and I tend to see light sources of this size, they tend to fluctuate between $40 and $50. Now, at a comparison, this is $279. So it's a little bit harder for me to say that this is quote unquote worth it to me or to you. I know I can tell you that this light source is brighter than this light source. I enjoy using this more than I enjoy using this more. However, in terms of pure value, pure dollar amount, and again, something that you have to consider is if you're looking for the absolute best possible results when you are scanning your negatives, which, you know, that's not always the end game, because we have the negatives. We can always revisit the negatives if we need a better, higher resolution scan as cameras improve, or if we want to re-edit some things. But again, that's just something that you have to consider for yourself. So starting out, if you are just starting out, this is probably the first corner that I personally would cut. Again, I really enjoy using this thing, but in terms of if you're on a budget and you're looking to see where you could feasibly cut a corner and still be happy with your workflow and your results, this is probably the first corner I would cut. However, I do love this thing, and I love having it, and I enjoy using it, so I'll leave that there. It's worth pointing out that the larger negative you're scanning, the more critical a light source, a quality light source, is going to be. I really only shoot 35 millimeter. I seldom shoot and scan medium format or anything larger, and I don't shoot any large format yet. However, you know, if you have a larger negative and you need a bright, even light source, this is going to become more and more critical to your workflow depending on the size of your negative. Another advantage I've found to this is that color balance in post-processing tends to be easier than with this cheap light table thing. This has a kind of a bluish hue to it that is, if you're experienced with Lightroom or Photoshop or Camera Raw or any post-processing photo software, then you're going to be able to balance that out just fine. However, I do recognize that kind of out of the box in terms of color balance, right out of the camera, the color balance tends to be better with this one. So this has an advantage in that regard. That brings us to the centerpiece of this kit, the 35mm Film Carrier Mark I. Without a doubt, this is the star of the show. It's the single most expensive piece in this kit. And in my opinion, for my workflow, it's the single most important piece of the kit. So let's take a look at it. This is the mechanism through which you feed your film, and with this knob, you advance frame by frame. Now, what I really like about this is as your film is being pulled through the carrier, nothing touches your frames. You don't have to handle your negatives. You don't have to put your negatives in some kind of carrier or mask or anything like that. It's all pulled through using the sprockets, using these rubberized wheels, and it does so in a really smooth way, and you don't have to handle your negatives, get fingerprints all over them, get dust all over them. I can also say that this is really sturdy, because when I opened the box, the first thing I did was drop it, so it's still working. Now, one really cool feature is that you can actually open this up and swap out the guides. The standard guides will scan a roll of 35mm film without the sprocket holes. However, you can also get these optional guides that will allow you to scan an entire frame with the sprocket holes. So if you want to scan your sprocket holes, that's an option. Now, these start at $329 US. It's the single most expensive piece of the kit, but again, in my workflow and in my opinion, it's the single most necessary piece of this kit. The way it pulls the film through flat and smoothly, and how you don't have to handle strips of negatives with your hands, how the mechanism basically pulls it through really nicely just with this knob, that's what makes this thing a real pleasure to use. So I love using this thing. Now, you guys sent in some questions, so I want to take a few moments to go through those. The first question is, does it scan already cut strips? So yes, you can scan strips that are already cut. Negative Supply says that the shortest advisable strip is 4 frames. And that's because when you feed it through this end, these wheels that pull the film through don't engage until it's in like the 3rd frame, basically. So your first frame, you can put it in manually. Your second frame, you can push through manually. And then your 3rd frame, you can begin to pull it through using this mechanism. Anything shorter than a strip of 4, Negative Supply in their YouTube video, which I will link, they've created a guide for using this thing. Great guide, actually. But they advise some different pieces of kit that are available through Negative Supply. However, I do want to talk about one feasible option, and that is the Pixelator, which was invented by Hamish Gill of 35mmc. So I actually made a video with Hamish, talking to Hamish about this thing. So this is, if you've got a really short strip, then this is a really feasible piece of equipment that is really inexpensive. But there are pieces of equipment available from Negative Supply that will allow you to scan a strip that's shorter than 4 frames. Next question was, can I just use it with a cheap copy stand? So I've actually already gone into that in the section about the riser. So I've pretty much answered that question. But I mean, just to reiterate, I would say that using a cheap copy stand, I would not advise it unless you are on a tight budget and you are really watching your pennies. The nominal amount of extra money to get the Negative Supply riser, I think, is worth the money. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you frustration. It's going to save you effort. And if those things are important to you, I would say that a cheap copy stand, unless it's a last resort, I would say the Negative Supply brand riser is definitely worth it. Next question is, does ambient light affect the scans? And the short answer is yes. I had a problem where I've got some overhead lights here in my studio, and they were reflecting right off of the film. So I had to turn those off. I would assume the brighter your ambient light, the more effect it's going to have on either reflections or the color balance of your scans. So I would do this in as dark a room as possible. I don't think it's necessary to do it in a completely dark room unless you are super particular about your results. But of course, this is a light-based process, so any light coming in ambient is going to have some effect in my experience. Next question is, how does it not scratch negatives? And that's a great question. It doesn't scratch your negatives because nothing in the carrier actually touches your frame. If you see the path going through this thing, the only things that touch your negatives are the wheels on the edges that pull your film through by the sprocket holes. So nothing touches your frame, hence nothing will scratch your negative. The next question is, how does it handle curved film? And so the answer to that is actually really simple. As your film travels through the carrier, it goes through the guide, and the guide holds the edges of your negative, the left and right edges of your negative, throughout the entire path. So the whole way it's going through here, your negative, your strip, is held flat the entire time. So really easy. You don't even have to think about it. It just does it for you. One thing that I was concerned about that ended up being a non-issue was dust. Ilford makes excellent anti-static cloths that you can use to gently wipe your negatives, and simply keeping your workspace free of dust with one of these little guys goes a really, really long way. And of course, the single question that I got the most is is it worth it? And that's where things might get a little bit complicated depending on your workflow. And that's what I would ask of you is, what are the things about your workflow that work for you and don't work for you? What are the frustrations? What are the efforts? What are the time investments? And what are the results of your workflow that are potentially working or not working for you? For example, I worked with a flatbed for a long time. I just found it to be an unpleasant, an unrewarding experience that I simply didn't like doing. If you're all about the results, there are flatbeds that can give you great results. If you don't mind handling strips of negatives and putting them in these carriers, and that's, again, it's all about your workflow. One thing that I hated and that I frankly never ever want to do again is load a strip into these negative carriers for a flatbed or a Plustek type scanner. I never want to do that ever again. I hate doing it. It's just such a turnoff to me. I simply don't like doing it. If you don't mind doing it, then again, that's something that you have to answer for yourself. But I hate doing it. I hate loading negatives into these things and getting them lined up and getting them flat and then closing the thing. I hate it. I never want to do it again. I'm never ever going to do it again. So again, that's me. That's my workflow. That's my frustration. So that kind of tells you where that points me in this spectrum of which I would choose. Now, if you're considering something like this Plustek here, this piece of kit has some really incredible advantages. It scans at amazingly high resolutions. This particular model will scan at a resolution of about 7200 dpi, if I recall correctly. So it'll give you a gigantic negative, amazing optical resolution, great color depth, but the con is that it's really slow. You've got to feed it one negative at a time. If you're scanning at really high resolutions, that's going to increase your time. I think at a color negative through this thing, one frame at a time with the digital dust and scratch removal turned on, takes about anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes, if I recall correctly. I haven't used this in a couple of years. And if I need to scan a negative at a super high resolution and super high color depth, I'm going to go for this. Like if I needed just a gigantic print, I will bust this thing out. But workflow-wise, the con with this is that it's just a really, really slow process. I would never scan a whole roll of 35 millimeter through this thing. That is just a nightmarish process. I don't have that kind of time, and I don't want to spend that kind of time. However, something that you need to consider is that these are really well priced. I think brand new, an 8200 AI is about $400. Used, you can find them anywhere from $200 to $300. Little piece of trivia: this is an optic film 7600i. This is actually the same model as the 8200. This just came bundled with different software. So I got this for less than $200. So you can find these for a steal, and they will give you amazing results. They're just really slow. If I were to sum up my personal feelings on the flatbed versus digital camera scanning method, it would be like this. Working with a flatbed, it takes me anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to scan, to digitize an entire roll of 35 millimeter film. And that's basically from when I turn on the computer and load up all the frames in those carriers, and I'm looking at a image on my computer. That's 30 to 45 minutes. With a digital camera and negative supply kit, it takes me about 5, maybe 6 minutes to digitize an entire roll of film, and using presets and a little bit of tweaking that I've built for myself in Lightroom and the Negative Lab Pro software, that's another, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. So we're looking at maybe 15, 20 minutes or so in total of when I start scanning using a digital camera and to the point where I'm looking at a digital file on my computer screen that's close enough to where I want it. Now, of course, I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time tweaking colors and exposure and tones, just like I would with a flatbed file. You know, neither result is perfect right out of the gate. They're each going to need tweaking and post-processing on their own anyway, so there's going to be time spent there anyway. But you know, from the time I start scanning to the time I'm looking at an entire roll on my computer, there's a big time difference there. So that alone is worth it to me. In addition to that, the digital camera method is simply less frustrating. Again, I talked about having to deal with those carriers and having to load strips of film in those. That's something I don't want to do that. I've done that for long enough to where I don't want to do it anymore. So when you take away that pain point, when you take away that frustration, it just makes this method all that much more attractive to me personally. Also, something that you need to take into consideration when you're piecing this kit together is your software. Do you already have Lightroom and or Photoshop? A Negative Lab Pro, which will help you to convert your negatives to positive images, a license is going to cost you about $99, but it's great software. I highly recommend it. It's what I use myself. Abe Fettig, who developed the Film Lab app originally as an iOS app, has created a standalone desktop app that you don't need Lightroom to use. So that world is kind of opening up. You have a lot of options out there, but you need to take that into consideration when you're budgeting for this. And of course, you need a digital camera and a lens. I personally use the Fujifilm system. I use an older digital camera. It's got a 16 megapixel sensor, which is more than enough for what I need. I use an XT1. Also, a lens, 1-to-1 macro lenses are pretty undervalued right now. I use a 55mm f3.5 micro Nikkor lens with the close-up adapter that'll give me a 1-to-1 macro. So last I checked, just a couple of days ago, those can be had for under $100. That lens was recommended to me by my friend Andrew Stewart, who is an amazing photographer out of Los Angeles. You should check him out. I really love and respect his work. But yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that he recommended that lens to me, because I didn't really know anything about macro lenses. And so he recommended to me, you know, something that just really worked and is really inexpensive, and it just works great. So again, that's the 55mm micro Nikkor. It's f3.5, but I scan at f16 anyway, so that I've got that. That's kind of that lens's sweet spot, is between f11 and f16. So that's where I scan. So I found that aperture really doesn't matter, since I'm stopping down anyway. So to answer that question of is it worth it or not, again, I need to reiterate that you need to look at your workflow. You need to look at what about it frustrates you, because for me, that's what turned me off to other workflows, the Flatbed workflow, the Plustek workflow. There was just too much and too many things about those workflows that turned me off, that made me not want to scan my film. And this workflow has really alleviated all those problems. It's alleviated those frustrations. It's personally saved me time and given me results that I'm super, super happy with. But you need to take a look at those things for yourself. Again, this is based on, my big decision is based on what I hated about those other workflows, and did this workflow with the Negative Supply Kit, did this alleviate those things that I hated? And the answer for me is yes, it alleviated those things, and using this kit is a real pleasure to use. Now, of course, there's going to be some differing opinions and some counterpoints to everything that I just said. I recently found this video by a YouTube channel called Sprocket Holes, which I will link, and he's got a different take on the matter. So I would suggest that you watch that video. It's such a great, well thought out video, and I really enjoyed watching it, and I really enjoyed looking at his points and his perspective on how his workflow differed from mine. So that's it. Those are my thoughts on the Negative Supply Basic Kit for 35mm film scanning. I love their naming conventions, by the way. This is called the Basic Kit for 35mm film scanning. This is called the Film Carrier Mark I. It reminds me, when I was little, my mom, whenever we got like a new pet, my mom, like we got a hamster, for example. My mom named that hamster Hammy. We got one of those crabs that they use whatever shell they can find. Hermit crab. My mom named it Hermie, and I love their simple, unpretentious naming convention of what they call everything. They call their riser the riser. This is the film carrier. The light source is called the light source. So I love that about Negative Supply. I love their simplicity. I love their aesthetic. Going off the rails a little bit here, but their packaging is awesome. The design on everything is awesome. Their website is so easy to navigate. I'm a big fan. Yeah, I'm going to be actually upgrading my kit to they have a film carrier which is automatic. So I'm going to be upgrading to that really soon. I plan to do that this year, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going off the rails here anyway. I hope you guys like this video. I hope it was helpful to you. My goal is to be helpful, and I want to be able to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. Get in touch with me, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm everywhere, and I would be happy to talk to you and answer your questions. So thank you for coming along. Please like this video. Please subscribe if you want to.